With less than 1 month to go until the release of Final Fantasy VII Remake, many fans are already thinking about the future of the franchise and what happens next. Now, whatever does happen, don't worry, I will be there to bring any updates right to you. I will also be covering every aspect of the game once it has been released with guides, tips and live streams, the usual stuff, so please do stay tuned to the channel. Final Fantasy VII Remake is releasing April 10th this year, and the game is a reimagining of the events that occurred around Midgar, i.e. the opening 5 to 10 hours of the original Final Fantasy VII. However, for the remake, everything from the characters, the story and locations of Midgar are being expanded upon to create a full-size standalone game, and it has been confirmed that the game will end once the party is ready to leave Midgar and explore the wider world. While we don't yet know how many hours of gameplay will be present, the Final Fantasy VII Remake will include 2 Blu-ray discs worth of content, though I'm pretty sure much of that will be used by the stunning pre-rendered cinematic cutscenes. Now, 2 questions I'm regularly seeing popping up over at various Reddit forums are 1, will subsequent episodes be offered as DLC content, and 2, how many further parts will there be before the entire story is completed? Well, question 1 is easily answered with a no. Each subsequent release in the Final Fantasy VII Remake project will be its own standalone game-sized experience as opposed to DLC or expansion type content. As a follow-up though to that topic, since people are often asking if this means they will have to spend a minimum of $60 for each subsequent release, the answer to that is, well, yes you will, presuming of course you wish to play each game as and when they are first released, rather than waiting for the inevitable compilation packs, which will no doubt come at a later time. And as to the number of total episodes, well, we simply do not know at this point how many there will be, and it's likely that Square themselves haven't even solidified this internally either. One thing I have noticed is that I keep seeing assumptions online that there are going to be 3 games in total, and sure, this may end up being the case, but right now we simply do not know. What we do know with certainty is that Part 2 is happening, and it's likely that reception to the overall project by the time of Part 2's release will determine the longevity of its future going forward. So when can we expect Part 2 to be in our hands? Well, again at this time there's no official release window, so speculation is all we have. But I do believe we can speculate reasonably. One particular worry that some people have is that since Part 1 has been in development for 5 years, then potentially about the same amount of time would be required for each of the subsequent episodes that follow. However, I don't believe this will be the case. First of all, development of Final Fantasy VII Remake has included some turbulence. Square Enix had originally partnered with third-party developer CyberConnect 2, however various issues arose and the 2 companies parted ways in 2017. Since that time, the remake has been developed internally only, and has clearly taken a different shape. There are many sources available online that demonstrate the vast differences between the remake as it was being created by the third-party developer to the actual version of the remake that we are now getting from Square themselves. But even aside from this turbulence, Part 1 of the remake had to be developed from scratch, but now its engine and assets will be available for future episodes, so unlike with Part 1, their foundations are pretty much already in place. We do actually have a real-life example that we can use at this point for at least, I guess, a rough comparison, and that is Final Fantasy XIII. Now, FF13 began full-time development in 2004, and yet was not released until 2009, so that provides us with a similar timescale to Final Fantasy VII Remake's development. And yet, its first sequel, Final Fantasy XIII-2, did not begin development until the year following Final Fantasy XIII's release, and then it was out just 18 months later. So with those numbers alone, one might be tempted to think that 13-2 was perhaps the weaker game, or I guess perhaps the bigger cash grab, and yet it ended up receiving even higher praise than its predecessor. The lesson to be learned here is that the development time required for Part 1 of a project does not necessarily translate over to the time required for the next subsequent part. And actually, in one sense, Final Fantasy VII Remake has one up on 13 because in November last year, Tetsuya Nomura confirmed to GameSpot that Part 2 was already in full-time development, yes, even before the release of Part 1. But if we just stick to 13's example with that 18-month timescale for Part 2's development, then that would mean a 2021 release. And yet, I don't think this is all that realistic either, for 2 reasons. Firstly, despite requiring less overall development time than Part 1, I still do expect the scope of the overall finished game of Part 2 to be on par with it. So I'm expecting the same level of quality and detail, and I don't know, 18 months of development just seems a little bit too ambitious for a game of such magnitude. Okay, fair enough, so that point's more conjecture on my part than anything, but the more convincing reason for a post-2021 release is based on what we do know. That is, we know that Part 1 has a 12-month exclusivity deal in place with Sony, meaning that Square will not be releasing the game to other systems, such as Xbox One, the next generation of consoles, or PC, until at minimum April of next year. Now, let's be honest, when the time does come for FF7 Remake's Xbox and PC debut, there's going to be quite the fanfare accompanying the game's release on those systems. It would be exceedingly unlikely that Square would wish to undermine the marketing of either the re-release of Part 1 or the initial release of Part 2 by having those releasing close together. It's also possible that Part 2 will be getting its own exclusivity deal, again, probably with Sony, and having that occur within the same time frame as Part 1's release on the other systems, yeah, it's going to be a recipe for confusion. So after thinking about all of these things, it is my belief that Square's current goal would be to target Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 for the year 2022. And that puts it nicely 2 years after the initial release of Part 1, but also far enough away from the exclusivity period of Part 1 that everybody by that point has had opportunity to play the first game and will then be hyped for what comes next. So yes, that is my prediction, that Square will be aiming for a 2020 release for Part 2, but of course, as we all know, game development can be an unpredictable process and delays are unfortunately commonplace, so feel free to come back and tell me I was wrong if 2022 comes and goes with no release of Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. But as always, I am very interested in hearing your thoughts as well. Do you agree with my conclusion of a 2022 release window for Part 2? If not, what is your prediction? Please do share in the comments below. But now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to play the Final Fantasy VII Remake demo once more. Yes, I promise. Just once more. I'll see you in the next video. Well folks, thanks so much for stopping by the video today. Now perhaps I might be able to persuade you to come and join us over in the Fuzzfinger Gaming Discord channel. It's a great place where we can continue on with the conversation, and I'll leave a link to it down in the video description. Until next time guys, have a great day and I'll see you in the next video.